Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling some really unique source material we've been given.
Yeah, it's certainly different. It's excerpts from a regressive hypnosis session transcript.
And it focuses on one, well, pretty specific and unusual reported event, the blackout on April 28th, 2025, the one affecting Spain, Portugal.
And parts of southern France, yeah. So our mission here really is to unpack this, to pull out the most, let's say, significant nuggets from this very particular viewpoint.
Right. We're looking at the reported physical stuff, sure, but also the metaphysical side it describes.
Exactly. Geopolitical connections, effects on, collective consciousness, even potential future hints. All according to this source.
Think of it as getting a kind of shortcut, a unique lens on this 2025 blackout event. So let's dive in.
Okay.
So first, just setting the scene. The source confirms this reported blackout, April 28th, 2025, Spain, Portugal, southern France.
Confirmed within the context of the session, yes. And the perspective it describes starts like high above Europe.
Looking down. And what does it focus on?
It immediately zooms in on an institution in southern France. It mentions similarities to CERN, something about electrons being involved.
Okay, so this facility in France is pinpointed right away.
Right, as being connected to the event somehow. That's the initial hit.
All right, so moving to the reported physical causes. This source talks about something out in the Atlantic, something human-led.
Yes, that's the claim. On a physical plane, it points to a human ship out in the Atlantic.
Doing what?
Conducting some kind of test, or maybe a launch. Something that needed a huge amount of power.
And how did they supposedly get that power or divert it?
Well, the source claims the power was obtained by deliberately shutting down the grid in those areas.
Deliberately.
It uses this really specific description, pulling a manual. And it even describes this manual thing as being U-shaped.
A U-shaped manual control. That's very specific. Does it say more about what that actually was?
Not really beyond that. Just, physical action, deliberate, U-shaped, implying it wasn't automated, somebody did something.
Got it. And this blackout, it wasn't meant to go on forever.
No, definitely not. The source states it was planned for just 24 hours.
Why so specific?
Because apparently 72 hours would have caused just, too much chaos, too much financial damage.
So the 24 hours was intentional, like a controlled...
A shock. That's the word used. It was intended as a shock.
Okay, let's go back to that facility in southern France you mentioned, the CERN-like place. How does that fit into this shock or test?
Right. So this place is apparently one of several in Europe that can collect energy, maybe for global emergencies, that kind of thing.
But in this case?
In this case, the source says it was used specifically as an isolated area being kind of a test.
So the facility itself was part of the test scenario, not just the blackout.
That seems to be the perspective here, yes.
And the purpose? Why run this test, this shock? The source says it was like a play. Or a joke.
Yeah, that's the surprising language it uses, like a play or joke for the people running it.
A joke with massive consequences. What was the point of this play?
Reportedly, it was about distraction, diverting public attention through the news coverage of the blackout away from the truth.
The truth about what?
About what they were really launching out there in the Atlantic.
Right.
The blackout was covered.
Okay, so the blackout and the French facility test site. Just a big misdirection. What was launched physically from the Atlantic then, according to this account?
Physically, it's described as a satellite, or maybe a ship, something going out of the atmosphere.
From where?
From what the source calls inside the matrix, basically from Earth.
And whose satellite was it? Who owns it?
This is interesting. The source claims it was made in the United States.
Okay, U.S. tech.
But, and this is the key point, it makes it reportedly does not belong to the U.S.
Oh. So who then?
It's described as international.
UNO-based.
UNO-based, like the United Nations or some similar global group.
Yeah, that seems to be the implication, yeah.
Huh.
Suggests a kind of global initiative behind it, not just one country, even if the tech originated in the U.S.
And its function. What was this international satellite supposed to do? Well, this is where it gets pretty wild. It's reportedly for gathering information, mapping the Earth.
Mapping? Like Google Earth.
Way beyond that, apparently. Mapping at a molecular level, using electromagnetic point.
Molecular level mapping? How?
It calls it a new wave, specifically a mirror kind of wave. That's the term used.
A mirror kind of wave, mapping molecules.
Okay.
And what's the bigger goal? Why map the Earth in such detail?
According to the source, this mapping is explicitly tied to their vision of New Earth.
Their vision? Whose vision? The UNO group.
Presumably, yeah.
Yeah.
The international group behind the satellite.
And what is this vision of New Earth?
It's described as, well, cold, technological, very advanced, but based on virtual reality.
Virtual reality, or...
Essentially, yeah. The source portrays it as a kind of natural evolution, as they see it, towards AI development. This mapping is like laying the groundwork for that tech reality.
Wow, okay, so a physical launch mapping for a virtual future. But the source brings in another layer, right? A metaphysical one.
Exactly. And this is where it gets really layered. It claims that parallel to the physical launch, something similar was launched on the metaphysical plane.
Another satellite.
Described that way, yeah. Also like a mirror. And this one was supposedly being watched by aliens.
Aliens watching a metaphysical satellite launch? What is this metaphysical object? How does it work?
It's not physical, obviously. It's described as code in the matrix, like a grid structure.
Road.
Yeah, growing with its own code, apparently being absorbed by the Earth's metaphysical grid. The idea seems to be manipulating or mapping that plane differently, injecting new code into reality's structure, basically.
Okay. That's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
How does the original Blackout Event, the power cut, connect to, like, wider geopolitics in this view?
Oh, it's absolutely connected, according to this transcript. It's seen as part of a much bigger plan.
A plan.
Yeah, what the source suggests started way back, maybe around the time of COVID, and this blackout represents the next level, the beginning of something else.
So, not random.
Definitely not random in this narrative. The idea for this specific blackout was supposedly planted years ago, energetically speaking, and it just gained enough power to manifest now.
Like a long-term strategy playing out. Who knew about this? Did governments know this blackout might happen?
The source says yes. Governments were aware it was a possibility.
And who is reportedly involved in this plan? Which governments or groups?
It talks about an alliance working towards a new age prosperity vision. That's the phrase used.
A new age prosperity vision. Which countries does the source say were involved? At the table, so to speak.
It lists quite a few. Canada, the U.S., Brazil, Argentina, Chile, China, Turkey, Pakistan, and India.
That's a broad group. Were they all fully on board?
Well, the source adds a crucial nuance there. It says not all of them necessarily agreed with the decisions or were like active participants. Some were just informed.
Okay, that's important. What about Russia? Were they in this alliance?
No, Russia is specifically mentioned as being against this plan, according to the source.
Against it. Why?
Their reported view is enough with the encoding. That's the quote.
Enough with the encoding. What do they want instead?
The source claims their focus is totally different. It's on physical development needed.
It's like
resources, actual construction cities, pipelines, roads, developing from inside is how it's put.
a different approach to changing the matrix then.
Yeah, the source calls it a more communist approach, interestingly. And it adds this perspective that Russia views people more as ants or potential workers for this physical development, less as individuals.
That's a pretty stark view. Does the source offer perspectives on how other nations view people?
It does. It claims the U.S. perspective is focused on people as consumers, money givers, enjoying TV, getting fat.
Ouch. And Europe?
Europe is seen as old, outdated, basically ruins. Not what the world needs now, according to this alliance's view.
And China?
China is seen as producing machines, again, very focused on function.
So, complex power dynamics here. Who's seen as being in charge within this alliance?
China is reportedly seen as being in power,
Yeah.
but feeling pressure from the U.S. and Brazil.
Brazil?
Yeah, and interestingly, Brazil is also reportedly working with Russia, forming a kind of new beginning alliance, though the source notes their internal hierarchy is still being worked out.
Okay, so a shifting landscape of alliances and competing visions. Let's switch focus to the impact on people, on consciousness. What did the source say this blackout did to the collective psyche?
Oh, it describes it quite dramatically.
Yeah.
Spreading like a disease, causing intense fear and panic.
How intense.
The phrase used is eating alive, like the fear was literally consuming people. And this energy, this fear, it's reportedly forming something called an egregor.
An egregor. For listeners who might not know that term, how does the source explain it here?
It's described as a kind of collective thought form, an energy structure built from shared emotion. This one, built from fear and panic, is reportedly connecting to other older egregors, things linked to, say, Christianity, political conflicts, various belief systems. It's feeding into the collective ego, basically.
Making it stronger.
Growing bigger, united on another level, is how the source puts it.
Does this fear egregor have a name in the transcript?
Yes, it's reportedly called the Terror March.
The terror march. That's bleak. Where is it strongest?
Above cities, wherever you have large groups of people concentrated.
But the source offers a way out, right? A way to disconnect from this.
Absolutely. That's a really key message here. It talks about staying in your own bubble, your own universe.
Your own space.
Right, where you are sovereign. And from that space, you can apparently choose whether or not to connect to this collective fear energy.
So individual choice matters. What about the blackout itself, the lights going out? Is there a symbolic meaning given?
Yes, very much so. It's seen as a switch, a deliberate switch to try and put minds into sleep mode.
How?
Through panic. The external lights go off, triggering internal panic, which shuts down higher awareness. That's a reported mechanism.
Okay. And this connects to another really startling claim in the source about metaphysical entities being active during the blackout.
Yeah, this is another big layer. Above cities, like Madrid specifically is mentioned, big entities were reportedly seen during the blackout.
Entities, what kind?
They're called master puppeteers, and they were reportedly playing.
Playing? Playing what? And who were they?
The source lists several types. Draco reptilians, other reptilians noted as being dominant this year in the session context.
Okay.
Greys, and also insectoids. There's a side note that insectoids are reportedly dominant in that area of Asia, linked to leadership there, and China's DNA is mentioned in connection with greys and insectoids, possibly from ancient ship arrivals or mythology.
Draco, reptilians, greys, insectoids. Playing above cities, what were they actually doing?
Their reported activity was dividing the energies, like manipulating the situation on a kind of game board.
A game board? To what end?
To create accidents. That's the claim.
They were causing accidents. How? Do different entities have different roles?
Apparently, yes. The source says the Draco and reptilians are the ones actively creating chaos, causing accidents, prompting emergency calls like ambulances, fires, and they're described as laughing and feeding off the energy.
And the greys and insectoids?
They reportedly stay more afar, kind of supervising. Their control method is different, more about emotional manipulation, switching people from joy to grief. Extreme control is the term used.
So it's not one boss, but an agreement.
Exactly, an agreement among different groups. Each thinks they're superior, but they have roles, all focused on collecting energy from human reactions.
That is quite a picture, a very disturbing one. But the source also comes back to this idea of the blackout being a test, doesn't it? And maybe a learning opportunity for you, the listener.
Right. It circles back to that. Beyond all the, geopolitical games and metaphysical puppeteers, it's framed as a test specifically for our technological society.
Testing what? Our reliance.
Yeah, our connection, our awareness, maybe our addiction to technology. It's described as another code in the matrix, one that works based on our existing belief systems.
And is there a way to neutralize this code, to pass the test, so to speak?
Yes, and it's actually very simple, according to the source.
Which is?
Not being afraid. Fear is reportedly the key. If you're not afraid, the code, the test, doesn't really work on you. And it's even suggested you can see the event positively.
How?
If you want to learn from it. That's the condition given.
What's the lesson then? If you experience it without fear, what do you learn?
The core lesson is realizing your own power. That nobody can control you if you want and you don't want.
So sovereignty again.
Exactly. By stepping outside the fear, staying in your bubble, you can observe your own reaction and understand why it didn't need to affect you so deeply. Why it didn't matter now I know, is the insight described. It also mentioned an interesting observation from this session that older people who'd maybe heard similar warnings before didn't panic as much.
Compared to younger people.
Yeah, suggesting younger generations, maybe more plugged into tech, might react differently, be more impacted.
Okay. So looking ahead, the source also offered glimpses of potential future scenarios based on how things looked on May 2nd, 2025, right? Something about nuclear power.
Yes, it mentions a shift in the nuclear power balance, somehow linked to that satellite we discussed earlier.
In another test.
A next test, yeah. And this is explicit, not a blackout this time.
What kind of test then?
This one involves energy being collected quite aggressively at one point, somewhere near Turkey or the Arabia Sea.
How is it collected?
Mainly via underground cables, pulling power mostly from old Europe. It's described as very aggressive, done by force.
By force. Do governments know?
The source claims they know, but feel unable to stop it. Because it involves nuclear energy, it's just too big.
And the purpose of collecting all this nuclear energy?
To launch something else, that's all it says. Another launch.
Okay. Are there other blackouts predicted in this source, besides the April 28th one?
Yes, but they're described as separate, not connected to the April 28th event or this nuclear energy collection.
What causes these other blackouts?
These ones are reportedly caused by a hurricane hitting coastlines.
Where?
It specifically mentions LA, Japan, and the Philippines as areas potentially affected. The timing given is around 30 August, and the year initially seen as 2018 was corrected during the session to 2026.
August 2026. And these hurricane blackouts, are they natural disasters?
Well, here's another major claim from the source. No. They're reportedly linked to man-made events.
Man-made hurricanes. How?
It links them to a specific point in the water inside of Earth, near India and some islands. Activity at this point is supposedly used to trigger man-made earthquakes.
Which then cause the hurricanes.
That seems to be the sequence described, yes. Man-made earthquakes leading to hurricanes and coastal blackouts.
Who or what is behind these events, according to the source?
This activity is connected back to CERN. Signals are reportedly sent from there.
To this underwater point.
Yes, described as a separate structure but connected to CERN. And the whole operation, the structure of the signals, was reportedly built by the military.
Which military?
He mentions the United States, Austria, and Switzerland specifically.
Yeah.
With some leadership controlling that water area, which is supposedly a neutral zone used as an excuse for scientific study.
An excuse.
Yeah.
So what's the real reported purpose of creating these disasters if it's not a test like the April blackout was?
Right. The source is clear. Not a test. These are reportedly created for a direct, aggressive reason.
Bitches.
To change the balance of power globally, and also to divert attention.
Divert attention.
Even more specifically, the claim is they want to literally change the shape of the land in those coastal areas, create more water.
Change the geography. Why?
So that the results can be framed and presented to the public as evidence of climate change.
Wow, okay. Deliberate geoengineering disguised as climate change to shift power balances. That's quite the claim. And how does this tie back to the geopolitical dynamics mentioned earlier? China, U.S., Brazil, Russia.
It reinforces that picture. China is still seen as in power, but pressured by the U.S. Brazil. Brazil and Russia still in their separate alliance. These reported future events seem designed to manipulate that ongoing power struggle or control the narrative around it.
So let's try and bring this all together for you, the listener. This deep dive has gone through a source that presents the April 28th, 2025 blackout as, well, vastly more complex than just a power grid failure.
Yeah, we've touched on claims about physical launches, U-shaped manuals, molecular mapping, tangled geopolitical alliances with differing agendas.
Metaphysical launches, code injection, fear-based egregores like the Terror March.
And even unseen entities reportedly playing games and creating chaos above cities during the event. It really weaves together multiple dimensions, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. But maybe the most crucial thread running through this source, the biggest takeaway it offers you, is about your own power, your own agency in all this.
Right, that amidst all these reported external forces, physical, political, metaphysical, the source insists you have the power not to be controlled, especially by managing fear.
By staying centered in your own bubble, your sovereign space, as the source puts it.
Yeah. It frames events like this, no matter how strange or disruptive they seem, as potential learning moments, opportunities to see how you react and to strengthen that inner sense of self, your own power, regardless of the external drama.
So as we wrap up this exploration of a truly unique and, let's face it, challenging perspective, here's a final thought for you to mull over. If you entertain the connections presented in this source between global events, consciousness, geopolitics, and maybe unseen forces, how does that potentially change your view of reality? What might be the true nature of the world you experience every day? And how does considering these layers affect how you perceive events unfolding around you?
Definitely something to think about. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
We'll be back next time to explore more sources, more layers.